Let me go back to this. So as I was saying before, I just took that short break, is that Jack F. Matlock was the U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union. And a couple of months ago, back in February, the beginning of this year, he said, I was there, NATO and the origins of the Ukraine crisis. After the fall of the Soviet Union, I told the Senate that the expansion to lead us where we are today. So he says, look, and so he was writing in February 14th, he said, this is an avoidable crisis between the United States and Russia that was predictable and was willfully precipitated, but can easily be resolved. So this could have been resolved by common sense. And he says, was this crisis avoidable? And in short, he says yes, because he says in 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, many observers wrongly believed they were witnessing the end of the Cold War, when it actually ended at least 2 years earlier by negotiation was in interest of all parties. President George Herbert Walker Bush, George W. Bush's father, hoped that Gorbachev would manage to keep most of the 12 non-Baltic republics in a voluntary federation. So just to unpack that, what Matlock was saying was when the Soviet Union fell, USSR fell, 1991, the US and Gorbachev had agreed that the Baltic Republic, which were east of Russia, like Latvia and Lithuania, etc., they would just be their own federation, and USSR or Russia would not go try to capture them. And that was sort of a tacit agreement that was held there, all right? And he makes this very important point, and I want everyone to really listen to this. What Matlock says is something very important. He says, and remember, he's a UN ambassador, or the US ambassador to Russia, and he was speaking favorably about Putin. He says, and despite frequently voiced fears, Vladimir Putin has never threatened to reabsorb the Baltic countries like Lithuania or to claim any of their territories, though he has criticized some that denied ethnic Russians a full right of citizenship, a principle that the European Union is pledged to enforce. Since Putin's major demand is an assurance that NATO will take no further members, remember that, and specifically not Ukraine or Georgia, obviously there would have been no basis for the present crisis if there had been no expansion of the alliance following the end of the Cold War, 1991, or if the expansion had occurred in harmony with building a security structure in Europe that included Russia. So this is very important to understand. In 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the United States, George Herbert Walker Bush, and Putin agreed that the Baltic, those like Latvia, Lithuania, would become their own independent nations. And Russia said, fine, we're not going to try to annex them or any of that. But the bottom line is the agreement was that none of them would join NATO. So get that clear. It was an agreement that was made between Washington and Moscow that Washington, e.g. NATO, would not try to go and bring those Baltic states into NATO. The only thing Putin wanted was any of the Russians who were living in those Baltic states, he wanted to make sure they had citizenship in those countries. And in fact, the European Union also agreed they should have citizenship in fairness to those people. But besides that, Putin said, I'm not going to go there and try to screw with those countries. So that's important to understand.